What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, must own or avoid controversial wide receivers. What does that mean exactly? Well, these players have the biggest disparity in their rankings among experts. Some experts may feel as though these players should be drafted very highly, while others think they should be drafted rounds later. So we're going to go over a handful of wide receivers, discuss their situation, and let you guys know exactly how we do feel about these players for the upcoming season. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Today's stat of the day is which player had the highest catch rate in 2019. Leave your answer in the comments section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, be sure to check out our website if you are interested in purchasing our draft package. Information on that can be found at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. We do have several players to go over today, so I'm going to hop right into the video. And the first player we're going to talk about is wide receiver Brandin Cooks of the Houston Texans. Cooks definitely has a massive gap when it comes to his rankings amongst experts, the highest ranking being wide receiver 16 and the lowest ranking being wide receiver 65. So definitely massive there. When you break it down though, it's easy to see why, and while I will say he has had a very lucky stretch of free agency quarterbacks that he has had throwing to him, that being Drew Brees to Tom Brady, then over to Jared Goff and now Deshaun Watson, there has been no lack of talent when it comes to the players throwing him the ball. However, the last time we saw Brandin Cooks on the field, he did not look good whatsoever. He was actually droppable by as early as halfway through the fantasy season. He did only appear in 14 games, so injury is likely to have played a factor. However, 14 games is way more than enough to produce more than just over 500 yards and a mere 2 receiving touchdowns. A far cry away from the type of production we had become accustomed to from Brandin Cooks, who was a 1,000-yard receiver for 4 consecutive seasons prior to 2019. Now that he's on the Texans though, a team that had lost DeAndre Hopkins in a trade with the Arizona Cardinals, which is huge when you're talking about the amount of targets that are now available from just a single receiver. DeAndre Hopkins had no fewer than 150 targets for each of the past 5 seasons. 150 targets is massive considering Brandin Cooks is one of the types of players who only needs 65 receptions to turn that into 1,000 receiving yards. The skill sets though of those two players are vastly different. DeAndre Hopkins, one of the better route runners in the league, incredible hands, and his footwork and foot placement as he's close to the sideline or in the end zone is some of the best that we've seen in quite a long time. Brandin Cooks, however, may not be as well versed when it comes to his route running tree or his hands, but DeAndre Hopkins being a player who never really had high yards after the catch, that's an area Brandin Cooks actually has an advantage in. So are we expecting Brandin Cooks to come in and be the wide receiver 1 on this team? Maybe he may finish there from a fantasy points perspective, but he is still going to be competing with other talented receivers, including Will Fuller, who could take over that de facto number 1 spot. So to say that this pick doesn't come with a significant amount of risk would just be a false statement. So where do we have Brandin Cooks ranked? Well, we're actually lower than consensus on Brandin Cooks. We have him as the wide receiver 44, which is lower than ADP and about 6 spots lower than the average consensus among experts. And truth be told, it's not that we're avoiding him. He does present a package that does bring in a ton of upside, and where he's currently being drafted, you're not paying a massive amount for him. However, this is also a player who has regressed in the touchdown department each of the past 5 seasons, and while Brandin Cooks has proven in the past to overcome the obstacle of transitioning teams and finding success early, typically wide receivers that are transitioning teams have their fair share of struggles in year 1. Brandin Cooks has proven to be immune to that in the past, that being with New England posting over 1,000 yards in year 1, and also with the Rams in year 1 posted over 1,200. We just can't make that same assumption though as we head into the 2020 season, because simply put, he did not look good in 2019. You can't make that same type of bet on a player who is trending downward and expect the same results that we'd seen 2-3 years prior. Outside of that though, we don't have him as a target or avoid player. Based on team composition, if your team is able to take on a certain amount of risk at that stage of the draft and you need a player who may have more upside than safety, maybe Brandin Cooks is your guy, but where he's currently been going in drafts, we just haven't been taking him at that value. The next controversial wide receiver we have is AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals. Currently, the experts have him ranked at a high point of wide receiver 12 and the low point of wide receiver 23, coming in at an average of about 26.3, which for a perennial top 12 wide receiver would be a great deal. Unfortunately though, AJ Green has not played a snap since midway through 2018. He also has a brand new quarterback who's a rookie and arguably some of the greatest competition for targets difference when it comes to Tyler Boyd and John Ross, who has showed some flashes of success while he's been healthy and on the field. It is worth noting AJ Green will be 32 to start the season, which is definitely getting up there in age, but we have seen receivers in the past, especially the more talented ones, play into their later stages of their 30s, that being 35 plus. And it's not to say AJ Green can't be one of those types of players, but the injuries that he has suffered are the same types of injuries that have been career-ending injuries for other wide receivers and running backs. So it's clear there is a significant amount of risk that's going to come with taking AJ Green. I don't think quarterback play should be a major factor in the risk for AJ Green, because it's not like this quarterback was drafted in the middle first round, second round, or even later. This was Joe Burrow, drafted first overall. History has shown us in the past these quarterbacks that are drafted that highly usually do have somewhat success in year one, and for a passer like Joe Burrow, he should be able to distribute the ball so long as AJ Green can be healthy and perform. So where do we have AJ Green currently ranked? As it stands today, we have AJ Green as the wide receiver 19, so higher than consensus, but I do have a feeling that as we approach the fantasy draft, there will be more news of AJ Green being on the field, maybe looking good. We'll see some of those hype type reports, which will boost his average draft position and even boost him up the rankings of the experts as well. It's hard to rank a player very highly if you haven't seen him on the field since fall of 2018. I will say for us though, taking a player with that much risk in the early rounds is never a good idea. We have been very vocal throughout the years of how important it is to hit on these early round receivers and running backs, just because the safety in the early rounds is much greater than that of the middle rounds and especially the late rounds. So depending on how high AJ Green creeps up, he may fall into a spot in the draft where the risk is going to outweigh the investment. But if healthy and all things go his way, it's hard to imagine AJ Green finishes outside of the top 20 at the wide receiver position. So for us, it's somewhat of a wait and see approach, but we are higher than consensus on AJ Green. But as it stands today, it is undeniable he is one of the more controversial wide receivers of the 2020 season. Coming up next, we have Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers, currently being drafted at a high point of wide receiver 11 and a low point of wide receiver 30. Not a massive gap there, but there are some concerns as to what his guaranteed production will be. Whenever you lose a potentially future Hall of Fame quarterback, someone like Phillip Rivers, who isn't getting his production from rushing yards, he's going to get it through the air, and you're replacing it with a passer like Tyrod Taylor, somebody who's not only just a mobile quarterback, and also a player who historically as a starter has played a more game manager-esque style of football. Keenan Allen himself has averaged 148 targets over the past 3 seasons, a number that is guaranteed to go down. When you consider that Tyrod Taylor's career high in total pass attempts is 436, 148 targets of his high would be a massive 34% target market share in the offense, a number that is definitely unrealistic to have as an expectation. Also, Mike Williams has continued to look better and better each of the past 3 seasons. Anytime a quarterback change happens, the offense is shaken up a bit, enough so for that the percentage of targets that go to each player, the distribution, isn't going to mirror what we've seen in years past. Another thing to consider is that this team and its defense is really good. Part of the reason why I could see them going after Tyrod Taylor is that he's not going to make some of those crucial mistakes that we saw Phillip Rivers making far too often in 2019, the types of mistakes that come with a gunslinger mentality. There's also a very strong chance that there is a quarterback transition sometime throughout the year. They invested heavy draft capital into Justin Herbert, who was taken with the 6th overall pick in the 2020 draft, and this could definitely be seen as a positive sign for someone like Keenan Allen. Justin Herbert would likely rely more on his arm than his legs, as seen by his average yards per carry in his last season in Oregon being under 1 yard. But with that, it's also no guarantee that he will play consistent enough to give that production to Keenan Allen on a per game basis, making him difficult to start even in positive matchups. So where do we currently have Keenan Allen ranked? We have him ranked as the wide receiver 20, which is 1 spot below consensus and 3 spots below ADP. And when it comes to if we're drafting Keenan Allen or not, we're not avoiding him per se, but the combination of all of these risk factors and unknowns, coupled with the value of the players being drafted around him, typically we're opting to draft players with similar upside but a safer floor, which seems almost contradictory when you're talking about Keenan Allen, one of the players who has proven to have a safer floor in the league, being peppered with targets. But without having Phillip Rivers there at the helm of the quarterback position, it's really tough to expect that same type of production. Up next, John Brown of the Buffalo Bills, with a current high ranking by experts of wide receiver 24 and a low ranking of wide receiver 59. This one's pretty simple, guys. For us, it's in a void. If you followed the channel for quite a while, we've always been very vocal about how much we do like John Brown. So for us to say he's in a void avoid, it's for good reason. The main factor, of course, Stefon Diggs is now a Buffalo Bill and is guaranteed to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense. The Buffalo Bills invested a first-round pick, a fifth-round pick, and a sixth-round pick in order to get him on the roster. They did receive a seventh-rounder in return, but clearly that is a very heavy investment in order to get the receiver on the team. Usage for Stefon Diggs is guaranteed to be higher than that of John Brown's. John Brown last season still dealt with his own share of consistency issues, posting disappointing weeks against teams with very beatable pass defenses. Some examples of that are games like Cincinnati, in which he was held to just 4 receptions for 51 yards, and against Philadelphia, where he posted 5 receptions for 54 yards, remaining scoreless in both contests. Also, this is a run-first team that relies on their defense. Josh Allen himself only threw for 3,000 yards last season. His career completion percentage is 56.3%. Meanwhile, he has not rushed for fewer than 500 yards in a single season since being drafted, and the touchdown expectancy for these types of players, without relying just on big plays, is going to be very low. Josh Allen rushed for 8 touchdowns through 12 games in his rookie season, and then followed that up with 9 rushing touchdowns in 2019. Typically, the variance is already high with players that rely on big plays, aka John Brown. Amplify that when his target market share is likely to decrease. He had 115 targets a season ago. He'll be lucky to receive 100 targets, and that's on the back of Josh Allen potentially increasing his completion percentage and accuracy, which is obviously not a guarantee. Right now, we do have John Brown ranked as wide receiver 43, 6 spots below consensus, 8 spots below ADP. So while he does have the upside to be a flex type of player you can insert in your lineup hoping for a big game, those big games are going to be more few and far between, especially when you compare it to what he was able to accomplish in 2019. Moving on, we have Marvin Jones of the Detroit Lions. Currently, Marvin Jones has a high ranking of wide receiver 21 and a low ranking of wide receiver 59. With Marvin Jones, you basically know what you're going to get. It's a boom-bust flex type of player that comes with an injury concern, who has the ability to score 4 touchdowns as he did against Minnesota, but also has the ability to post complete duds, which can easily be seen by being held to under 50 receiving yards in 7 of 13 games last season, remaining scoreless in 8 games as well. Marvin Jones is now 30 years old, and the days of expecting him to potentially lead his team when it comes to targets and receiving, they're over. Kenny Golladay is going to be the number 1 receiver in this offense, and by a heavy margin. Also, TJ Hawkinson, we are expecting him to take steps forward as we head into year 2. He did show flashes of receiving excellence, especially in week 1, something he can certainly build upon as he heads into his sophomore season. Marvin Jones also has 1 career year over 1,000 receiving yards. He has also scored double-digit touchdowns as well in 1 season, but that was with Cincinnati, and his 9 touchdowns last year are pretty deceiving. He had 4 of them in 1 game, so sprinkle the remaining 5 across the other 12 performances he had, and you have a player that's slightly lacking the upside we're looking for in these late-round picks. Also factor in, Marvin Jones does have the appearance of a value. He's finished as a wide receiver 1 in years past, but hasn't really came close since Golden Tate left, and while we are high on Matthew Stafford, that's more of a credit of the potential upside of Kenny Golladay than that of the upside of Marvin Jones. In the later rounds, we shoot for maximum upside. We're looking for those players that can be top 24, potential wide receiver 1s, and while Kenny Golladay is healthy, you're just not going to get that from Marvin Jones, and he's an aging receiver who just hasn't really been healthy for the past 2 seasons. We currently have him ranked as the wide receiver 41, 5 spots below experts' consensus rankings, 2 spots below ADP. Again, he's not the worst pick you can make in that range, but it's hard to imagine him having any sort of league-winning type of upside when we really haven't seen him put together a string of solid performances while also trending downward. The final controversial wide receiver that we have is Michael Gallup of the Dallas Cowboys, and Gallup did have somewhat of a breakout last season. He posted 1,107 receiving yards with 66 receptions to go along with 6 receiving touchdowns. He did all of that while only appearing in 14 games. Now for this upcoming season, he's coming into year 3, which typically is the breakout year for wide receivers. So considering he was able to put all of that together in his sophomore season, theoretically there should be potentially more upside as he heads into year 3. Unfortunately for him though, the Dallas Cowboys invested heavy draft capital into CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, who if you've been following our videos so far this offseason, is somebody we're very high on. We love the talent, we love the opportunity, and these two should compete to be second on this team in total targets when all is said and done. So who's the player we haven't spoken about on this offense yet from a receiving perspective? That's Amari Cooper. And while he does play a little bit more consistent than he had over in Oakland, he's still a receiver with heavy consistency issues. He did post over 1,100 receiving yards on over 70 receptions, but realistically he did only have 3 games with 8 or more receptions, and was also held to 50 or fewer receiving yards in 7 of 16 games. Those consistency issues played heavily into the success of Michael Gallup. Well, this season, CeeDee Lamb is going to be another option in those games where Amari Cooper is essentially shut down. Also, Blake Jarwin, he should see more improvement as we head into the 2020 season, which is a reason why Dak Prescott is coming off the board as the quarterback 4 in most rankings. Currently, Michael Gallup has a high ranking by experts of wide receiver 22 and a low ranking by experts of wide receiver 64. Where do we fall between those numbers? We currently have him as the wide receiver 36, 3 spots below experts consensus rankings, 5 spots below ADP. So yes, we do think he is a flex level player, and don't get me wrong, he does have that type of upside to put together some good performances throughout the season, but for how well and consistently he played in 2019, most people are going to expect him to take even another step further, which is actually going to be hindered by the emergence of CeeDee Lamb. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about you hit that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.